Welcome back everyone. This is one of those videos where I try and do a cheery introduction to keep you interested, but then I'm also very aware of what is to come in this video. You might be too. This is another part in our series where we delve into shocking stories of humans using other humans to further their scientific knowledge. There are laws all over the world now against human experimentation, but over the years this hasn't stopped some people. Let's see if you can handle this. My name is Danny Burke and this is the top 10 scary human experiment stories part 3. Hey guys, it's me, Danny Burke. I'm just jumping into here really quick to let you guys know all about a brand new channel that I'm in, Esports 1. It's going to be all things esports with loads of videos about your favorite games and streamers. The first video is coming out on Thursday. Have you guys ever wanted to say, I was here since the beginning of this channel? Well, now is your chance. You'll find the link to Esports 1 in the description box and the comment section, so go and subscribe and get ready to be the first viewers of a brand new channel. It's going to be big. Back to the video. Starting us off at number 10 now, we have the Resurrection. We're starting off with a really weird one here from 1780. Luigi Galvani was a scientist who discovered that he could make the muscles of a dead frog twitch and jerk with a spark of electricity. He was fascinated by this and his curiosity took him into a very morbid place. He obtained the head of an ox and used electricity to make its tongue move. Soon, other scientists obtained the bodies of recently executed criminals to carry out their experiments. Andrew Ure would make incisions in corpses' necks, hips and heels, exposing different nerves to jolts from metallic rods. He was amazed to see that one particular jolt made the diaphragm go up and down as if the dead body was actually breathing. He even used the jolts on their faces, causing expressions of fear, rage, horror, despair, anguish and ghastly smiles. If this sounds like Frankenstein to you, well, you're not exactly wrong. Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, was well aware of these experiments. Some might say that Frankenstein is sort of an exaggerated version of these experiments, others say they are equally disturbing. Moving on to number 9 now, we have artificial blood. This one honestly made me squirm. In 2004, a story broke in Chicago about artificial blood being tested on people without their consent. You heard me right, artificial blood, no consent. Paramedics were testing this experimental blood substitute on severely injured patients without their consent. Supporters of the product, known as polyheme, say it's safer and could save the lives of many of the nearly 100,000 people who die of bleeding injuries every year in the US. They argue that they can't ask for the patient's consent because quite often they are unconscious or in shock. As a result, they were allowed to bypass the consent rules because their work comes under emergency life-saving research. Some patients' rights advocates disagreed though, saying it was a slippery slope to demolishing individual rights to experimental consent. They also point out that a higher than average number of people had died during similar studies with this thing. How would you guys feel if they tested this artificial blood on you without you ever knowing? Next up at number 8 now, we have the newborns. This is a shocking experiment that took place at the University of California in the 1960s. Researchers there wanted to study how blood pressure and blood flow worked on babies. They used 113 newborns in their studies, ranging from 3 days old down to just 1 hour. 1 hour old. In one experiment, a catheter was inserted through the umbilical artery of the babies and into the aorta. Then the newborns' feet were immersed in ice water so they could test the aortic pressure. Sounds pretty shocking, right? Imagine if this was your first experience on Earth. Well, amazingly, it gets worse. In another of the study's experiments, up to 50 newborns were strapped onto a circumcision board. They then tilted the board almost upside down so that the baby's blood rushed to their heads. Then they measured the blood pressure. Just the whole thing sounds horrible. Next up at number 7 now, we have the plague. This is the story of Richard Strong. He was a tropical medicine professor at Harvard who worked on a number of serious diseases. In 1906, while working as the head of Philippine Biological Laboratory, he tested a potential cholera vaccine on 24 men. Little did he know though that the vaccines had been accidentally contaminated with bubonic plague. If that disease sounds familiar to you, you may recognize it by another name, the Black Death. This is the plague that was responsible for wiping out somewhere between 75 to 200 million people across Europe and Asia. Somehow, Mr. Strong had injected this devastating disease straight into his 24 patients, 13 of them died. Moving on to number 6 now, we have Digestion. On June 6, 1822, a Canadian man called Alexis St. Martin was accidentally shot in Michigan at a fur trading post. The bullet left left a hole through his side which eventually healed into a fistula, a hole into his stomach through the abdominal wall. An American army doctor called William Beaumont was treating him and had an idea. At the time, not much was known in science about human digestion, and Beaumont saw an opportunity. He could literally watch the process of digestion by dangling food on a string into the man's stomach, then later pulling it out to observe to what extent it had been digested. A string. He dangled the food into the guy's stomach on a string. What? He continued these experiments for the best part of 10 years. The results did teach the world a lot about how digestion works, and Alexis himself lived to 83 years old. A win-win for everyone, but still a pretty gory story. Next up at number 5 now, we have the cancer patients. This was a horrible experiment that took place at the University of Cincinnati from 1960 to 1971. Dr. Eugene Sanger was a radiologist at the university who was being funded by the US military to test the effects of radiation in the event of a nuclear attack. He exposed 88 poor black patients with cancer to whole body radiation. He told them that this was a treatment for their cancer. It was not that. The patients were not asked to sign consent forms, nor were they told the Pentagon was funding the experiment. In periods of up to 1 hour, they were exposed to about 20,000 x-rays worth of radiation. The results included nausea, vomiting, severe stomach pains, loss of appetite, and mental confusion. A report in 1972 found that up to a quarter of patients died from radiation poisoning. This is honestly one of the most disturbing experiments I've ever heard of. Prime example of institutionalized racism and complete disregard for the sanctity of human life. Sorry to get quite heavy there, but yeah, this one was really shocking. Moving on to number 4 now, we have the Milgram Experiment. This is one of the most famous psychology experiments ever conducted, but perhaps not for the best reasons. It was a study of obedience in psychology carried out by Stanley Milgram, a psychologist at Yale University. He was interested in World War II and the justifications many Nazis gave for the atrocities they did. The reason often came down to obedience. So, in 1961, Milgram set up tests to see how far Americans would go if they were told to commit crimes by an authority figure. Each participant was paired up with another person. One was told they were the learner, the other was the teacher. What the participant didn't know was that they were always the teacher. The whole thing was fixed. The learner was actually in on the experiment. The teacher was taken into a separate room and told to ask the learner a series of questions over the phone. If they answered wrong, the teacher was told to press a button and administer an electric shock to the learner. Of course, the shocks weren't real, but the teacher didn't know that. All they heard was the ever-increasing screams from the learner each time they supposedly shocked them. Some participants voiced their concerns and were calmly told by the man in the lab coat that the experiment must go on. Despite never being told they couldn't leave, 65% of participants continued up to the highest level of 450 volts, by which point the screams had worryingly stopped altogether. It was a shocking insight into how obedience can drive humans to do terrible things, no matter where they're from in the world. Next up at number 3 now, we have boiling water. Before the Civil War, medical treatments were crude at best. During the 1840s, Dr. Walter Jones thought he had found a cure for typhoid fever, pouring 5 gallons of boiling hot water onto bare skin. No prizes for knowing how that turned out. He carried out his treatment on slaves, which included a young man who was forced to lie down and endure the boiling water being poured on his bare skin repeatedly for hours and hours. As far as modern science is concerned, this is not a valid cure for typhoid fever, rather it was plain old torture. Tragically, Dr. Walter and his accomplices got away with it, mostly because the research was conducted on slaves. Moving on to number 2 now, we have David Reimer. This is the tragic tale of a Canadian man who was born as a twin in 1965. At 8 months old, he and his brother had minor medical problems involving their penises. The doctor botched the surgery though on David, burning virtually all of his penis off. At the advice of a psychologist, David's parents agreed to have him sex reassigned and made into a female through a combination of surgical, hormonal and psychological treatment. The treatment was plagued with cases of child abuse by his doctor, Dr. John Money. David was raised as a girl called Brenda up until the age of 14, whereupon his parents finally decided to tell him the truth. Over the next 7 years, David changed his name back to David and underwent treatment to try and reverse the reassignment. He had a troubled life afterwards though, mired in personal tragedy, including the suicide of his own twin brother when his wife left left him in 2004, he took his own life at the age of 38. And finally, at number 1 now, we have psychic driving. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron was a scientist behind one of the most disturbing brainwashing experiments ever. The CIA funded his research. They wanted to find ways to wipe a person's memory clean and even implant new memories that they thought were their own. The patients thought they were being treated for personal trauma. They had no idea of the true damage being done to them. Cameron would play endless tapes to his patients for hours at a time while bringing them in and out of an insulin-induced coma. Sometimes this would go on for 85 days. The treatment was known as psychic driving. In modern times, many of the families affected by these experiments have been paid large sums of money for what they went through, but no government or agency has ever stepped forward to admit their wrongdoing. Alright guys, now we can breathe for a second. It's time for you guys to think about if we want to do a part 4 of this. Is it a little bit too much to handle? I know it can make me feel a little bit weird sometimes. Would you like something funny this time? Or maybe some more urban legends videos? It's up to you. Let me know in the comment section down below. Thanks as always for watching. My name is Danny Burke and I'll see you all in the next video.